The gunshot cracked through the dusty air of Redemption Springs, silencing the crowd as Clara Summers frantically searched for an escape among the sea of leering faces. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild enough that a woman could find herself on an auction block through nothing more than cruel circumstance and bad luck. $500 for this fine specimen, bellowed the auctioneer, a portly man with a handlebar mustache that twitched when he spoke. Look at them golden curls, gentlemen. Ain't seen nothing so pretty west of the Mississippi. Clara's wrists burned against the coarse rope binding them. Just 3 weeks ago, she'd been traveling west with her uncle, her only living relative, when their stagecoach was ambushed. Her uncle shot dead. Clara had been captured by a gang of outlaws who saw opportunity in her beauty and desperate situation. Now she stood trembling on a makeshift platform behind the town's largest saloon, displayed like livestock. 600, called a silver-haired man with yellow teeth and hands that looked like they'd never seen honest work. 7, countered a voice from the back, followed by dark chuckles. Clara bit her lip to keep from crying. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. $800, came another bid, this time from a sweaty man with a scar running from his eye to his chin. The auctioneer grinned. 800 going once, she's not for sale. The words cut through the crowd like a knife. All heads turned toward the tall figure leaning against the wall of the saloon. He pushed himself upright, spurs jingling with each deliberate step as he approached the platform. The crowd parted before him like water. Yorick Callahan was not a man people stood in the way of. His reputation had preceded him to Redemption Springs fair but deadly. A former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter who lived by his own code. His face was weathered by sun and hardship, but his eyes remained sharp as steel under the brim of his black hat. "This ain't your business, Callahan," the auctioneer said, voice suddenly less sure. "I'm making it my business." Yorick's hand rested casually near his holstered Colt. "The lady belongs with me." Clara's eyes widened. She'd never seen this man before in her life. The auctioneer laughed nervously. "Well now, if you want a bid, no bids." Yorick climbed the steps to the platform with an easy grace that belied his readiness for trouble. "I said she belongs with me. My wife was taken by Blackwater Gang 3 weeks back during a stagecoach robbery, and here she is." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara opened her mouth to protest this lie, but something in Yorick's steady gaze stopped her. A slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Wife," the auctioneer scoffed. "She ain't wearing no ring. Bandits took it along with everything else." Yorick moved closer to Clara, his voice dropping. "Play along if you want to live," he whispered before raising his voice again. "Clara, darling, these men bothering you, her name." How did he know her name? Clara swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, husband, they've been most unkind." The man with the scar stepped forward. "Hold on now. We paid good money for this woman, 200 to the Blackwater boys." "Then you paid for stolen property," Yorick replied, his tone conversational but with an edge that made the man step back. "And dealing in stolen property is a hanging offense in these parts." The auctioneer's face had gone pale. "Now see here, Sheriff Michaels know about this little auction of yours." Yorick cut in, and the silence that followed was answer enough. "Didn't think so." With swift movements, he untied Clara's bonds, his calloused fingers gentle against her raw wrists. "Anyone here wants to stop me taking my wife home best speak now," he announced to the crowd, one arm protectively around Clara's shoulders. No one moved. Wise choice. Yorick guided Clara down the steps. The crowd parted again, eyes averted now from the pair. Clara's heart hammered in her chest as they walked away from the saloon. Every step she expected shouts, gunfire, something to stop this impossible rescue. but there was only silence and the sound of their boots in the dirt. "Keep walking," Yorick murmured, his arm still around her shoulders. "Don't look back. My horse is at the livery just past the general store." "Why?" Clara finally managed to whisper. "Why help me?" He didn't answer until they'd reached the livery stable. A magnificent black stallion stood in one of the stalls, already saddled. "Because no person should be sold like cattle," he said finally, checking his saddle straps. "And because I've been hunting the Blackwater Gang for 6 months. They killed my uncle," Clara said, her voice small but steady, "3 weeks ago." Something flickered in Yorick's eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Summers. You know who I am. I've been tracking the gang, found their camp yesterday, but they'd already moved on, found letters in their belongings. Your name was mentioned." He offered her a hand to mount. "We need to ride. Those men back there won't stay scared forever, and some might decide a bounty hunter's reputation isn't worth passing up what they paid for." Clara hesitated only briefly before taking his hand. His grip was strong as he helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. "Where are we going?" she asked as they rode out of town, the setting sun casting long shadows ahead of them. "Somewhere safe," was all he said, spurring the horse into a gallop. As they rode away from Redemption Springs, Clara realized that for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than fear. This stranger, this Yorick Callahan, had risked his life for her. And though she knew nothing about him beyond his name and profession, she found herself trusting him more than she had trusted anyone since her uncle's death. The desert landscape blurred around them as they rode into the gathering dusk, leaving behind the town that had nearly been Clara's doom, heading toward an uncertain future that somehow felt full of possibility. As night fell across the desert, Yorick guided his stallion off the main trail and into a maze of rock formations. Clara's back ached from hours of riding, but she hadn't uttered a single complaint. The moon rose, casting silver light over the landscape, turning it ethereal and strange. "Not much farther," Yorick said, his voice close to her ear. It was the first either had spoken in over an hour. Clara nodded, too exhausted for words. The events of the day had left her drained. From the horror of the auction block to this unexpected rescue, her emotions had been pulled in too many directions. They rounded a bend in the rocky path, and a small cabin came into view, nestled against the base of a cliff. It was simple but sturdy looking, with a small corral to one side. "Your home?" Clara asked as Yorick helped her dismount, her legs nearly buckled beneath her. "One of them." He steadied her with a firm hand. "I keep several places scattered around the territory, safer that way." Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs occupied another. A bed with a patchwork quilt stood in one corner, and various supplies lined shelves along the walls. "You can take the bed," Yorick said, lighting a lantern. "I'll sleep by the fire." Clara stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. Her once fine traveling dress was torn and dirty, her hair tangled from weeks without proper care. "There's a creek about 50 yards behind the cabin," Yorick said, seeming to read her thoughts. "And I've got some spare clothes that might fit well enough until we can get you something proper." He rummaged through a trunk and produced a simple shirt and pants. "Thank you." Clara accepted the clothes. "For everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Yorick shook his head. "No need for that. Just tell me everything you remember about the Blackwater Gang. That'll be payment enough." While Clara washed at the creek, Yorick prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. By the time she returned, wearing his 2 large clothes with her damp hair hanging loose around her shoulders, he had the table set. "Feel better?" he asked, pouring her a cup of strong black coffee. like a new woman. Clara sat across from him, grateful for the hot food despite its simplicity. Though I fear I look ridiculous in these. The corner of Yorick's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Better than what you were wearing. They ate in silence for a while. Clara studied her rescuer in the lamplight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only in his late 20s, though the life he led had clearly taken its toll. A scar ran along his jawline, and another crossed the back of his right hand. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Why are you hunting the Blackwater Gang?" she finally asked. Yorick set down his cup. "They killed someone important to me too." "I'm sorry." He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "Tell me about your uncle and how you ended up on that auction block." Clara took a deep breath and began her story. "Uncle Thomas was taking me to San Francisco. After my parents died of fever last year, he was all the family I had left. He'd arranged for me to stay with his sister there, to have a fresh start." She stared into her coffee. "We were 3 days out from St. Louis when the stagecoach was attacked." "How many men?" Yorick asked. "5, I think. It happened so fast. The driver was shot first, then Uncle Thomas when he tried to protect me." Her voice wavered. "They took our valuables, then argued over what to do with me. Their leader, a man with a burned face, decided I was worth more alive than dead." Yorick's jaw tightened. "Ezra Blackwater." Clara nodded. "For weeks they dragged me along as they robbed and terrorized their way across the territory. Then yesterday they sold me to those men in Redemption Springs." "For liquor money," Yorick said with disgust. "It fits their pattern. They're not just outlaws, they're the worst kind of predators." "And now," Clara asked softly, "what happens to me now?" Yorick studied her for a moment. "That depends on you. I can escort you to San Francisco as your uncle intended, or to any town with a proper stagecoach station." He paused. "Or you could help me catch the men who murdered your uncle." Clara's eyes widened. "How could I possibly help you? You've seen their faces, know their voices. Where they've been, some of their habits, that's valuable." He leaned forward. "But I won't lie to you, it would be dangerous. These men are killers who won't hesitate to silence a witness. You think they'll come after me, eventually. Men like that don't leave loose ends if they can help it." Yorick's gaze was steady. "But you'd be safer with me than on your own, and I give you my word that no harm will come to you while you're under my protection." Clara considered his words. The proper thing would be to continue to San Francisco, to her aunt's house, to the life her uncle had planned for her. The safe thing, but her uncle lay in an unmarked grave, murdered by men who thought nothing of selling a human being. The same men who had subjected her to weeks of fear and humiliation. "I'll help you," she said firmly. "I want to see them pay for what they've done." Something like respect flickered in Yorick's eyes. "We'll leave at first light. Try to get some rest, Miss Summers. Tomorrow will be a long day." As Clara settled into the bed, pulling the rough quilt around her, she watched Yorick checking his guns by the fire. There was something comforting about his methodical movements, his quiet competence. "Mr. Callahan," she called softly. He looked up. "Thank you for saying I was your wife. For getting me out of there." Yorick nodded once. "Get some sleep, Miss Summers." As Clara drifted off, she realized that for the first time since the stagecoach attack, she felt safe. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wouldn't face it alone. Dawn broke in a riot of pink and gold over the desert landscape. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Yorick moving quietly around the cabin. She lay still for a moment, remembering where she was and how she had come to be there. "Morning," Yorick said, when he noticed her stirring. "There's coffee if you want it." Clara sat up, self-consciously smoothing her borrowed clothes. "Thank you." While they shared a breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit, Yorick outlined his plan. "We'll head to Copper Creek. It's a mining town about 2 days' ride from here. Last I heard, the Blackwater Gang was spotted near there 3 days ago. What will we do when we find them? Clara asked. I'll handle that part, Yorick said firmly. Your job is to identify them, nothing more. Clara wanted to argue but recognized the sense in his words. She had no experience with gunfights or confronting killers. I have something for you, Yorick said, crossing to his saddlebags. He returned with a small Derringer pistol. Do you know how to use one of these? Clara shook her head. It's simple enough. This is the trigger. Point and pull. It only has 2 shots, so make them count. He showed her how to load it, then handed it to her. Keep it hidden but accessible. Only use it if you have no other choice. The weight of the small gun felt strange in Clara's hand, but she tucked it into her pocket. It represented something she'd had precious little of lately, control over her own fate. They packed quickly, Yorick efficient in his movements. As they prepared to leave, he handed her a wide-brimmed hat. For the sun, he explained, and to help hide your face. Word of what happened in Redemption Springs will spread, and we don't need anyone recognizing you. Outside, as Yorick saddled his horse, Clara patted the black stallion's neck. What's his name? Midnight, Yorick replied, checking the cinch. Been with me 5 years now. He's beautiful. Clara stroked the horse's velvety nose. My father raised horses back east. I used to ride every day. You ride well. I noticed yesterday. Yorick offered her a hand up, then mounted behind her. We'll get you your own horse in Copper Creek. As they rode away from the cabin, Clara felt an unexpected twinge of regret. Brief as her stay had been, it had offered sanctuary when she needed it most. The day grew hot as they traveled, the sun beating down mercilessly. Yorick kept them to less traveled paths, avoiding the main trails where they might encounter other riders. They spoke little, conserving energy and water, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than strained. Around midday, they stopped in the shade of a rocky outcropping to rest and water midnight. Clara stretched her legs, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Not used to long rides anymore, Yorick asked, handing her a canteen. It's been some time, she admitted, taking a careful sip of the tepid water. Though I rode daily as a girl. Where was home? He asked, surprising her with the personal question. Virginia. My father had a small horse farm outside Richmond. Clara gazed at the harsh landscape around them. Nothing like this. War changed things for your family, Clara nodded. Father fought for the Confederacy. Not because he believed in slavery, we never owned slaves, but because Virginia was home. He came back changed. The farm struggled. When both my parents died last year, there was nothing left. Yorick nodded, understanding in his eyes. The war had changed everything for countless families, reshaping the nation in ways still being felt a decade later. What about you? Clara ventured. Where's home? Yorick was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Texas, originally, he finally said. Joined the Rangers after the war, left them 3 years ago, to become a bounty hunter, to find justice my own way. Something dark passed across his features. The law doesn't always protect those who need protecting. Before Clara could ask more, Yorick tensed, his hand moving to his gun. Someone's coming. Stay behind me. Clara's heart pounded as she heard it, 2 approaching hoofbeats. Yorick positioned himself between her and the sound, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. Around the bend came 2 riders, trail-worn men with weathered faces. They pulled up short at the sight of Yorick and Clara. Afternoon, the older of the 2 called, lifting his hand in greeting. Yorick nodded but didn't relax his stance. Afternoon. Heading to Copper Creek. The man asked conversationally. Passing through, Yorick replied noncommittally. You coming from there? Yep. Nothing worth staying for unless you like bad whiskey and worse company." The man spat tobacco juice into the dust. His eyes lingered curiously on Clara before returning to Yorick. "Road's clear ahead, though there's word of Comanche activity further west." "Appreciate the warning," Yorick said. The men tipped their hats and continued on their way. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Are they gone?" she whispered after a moment. Yorick waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. "Yes, but we should move on. Don't like staying in one place too long." As they mounted up and continued their journey, Clara found herself studying Yorick's profile. There was so much she didn't know about this man who had risked his life for her. What had driven him from the Texas Rangers to this solitary existence? Who had the Blackwater Gang taken from him? The sun was beginning its descent when Yorick guided Midnight off the trail again, this time toward a stand of cottonwoods that indicated water. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, dismounting and helping Clara down. "Creek's got good water, and these trees will hide our fire from the trail." Clara's legs trembled as she stood, her body unaccustomed to such long hours in the saddle. She tried not to grimace, but Yorick noticed. "It gets easier," he said, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. "By the time we reach Copper Creek, you'll have found your riding legs again." While Yorick tended to Midnight, Clara gathered wood for a small fire. The familiar task reminded her of camping trips with her father long ago, before the war had changed everything. As darkness fell, they sat by the fire eating a simple meal of jerky and beans. The night was clear, stars emerging in breathtaking profusion above them. Clara had never seen so many stars, the sky in Virginia often obscured by trees or clouds. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. Yorick followed her gaze. "One good thing about this country, you can see forever on a clear night." "Do you ever miss home?" Clara asked, emboldened by the darkness and the strange intimacy of sharing a campfire in the wilderness. Yorick was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. But home isn't there anymore." "Because of what happened during the war, after." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks flying upward. "I had a wife, Sarah, and a daughter, Emma." The past tense told Clara everything. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Fever took them 5 years ago, same week, just like that." His voice was flat, as if he drained all emotion from the memory to make it bearable. "That's when I joined the Rangers. Needed something to do, I guess, a purpose." "And now you hunt men like the Blackwater Gang," he nodded. "Men who prey on others. Who think they can take what isn't theirs without consequence." His eyes, reflecting the firelight, found hers across the flames. "Men who would sell a woman at auction." Clara shivered despite the warmth of the fire. "When they had me, those weeks with the gang, I kept thinking surely someone would help me, some decent person would step in." She wrapped her arms around herself. "No one did, not until you. People are afraid," Yorick said. "Fear makes cowards of most, but not you." Something like a smile touched his lips. "Oh, I get afraid. Just learned long ago that doing the right thing matters more than being afraid." Clara considered his words. "My uncle used to say character is what you do when no one's watching." "Smart man, your uncle." "Yes, he was." Clara blinked back sudden tears. "I miss him." Yorick nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Try to get some sleep. I'll take first watch." Clara settled onto her bedroll, pulling a blanket around her against the desert night's growing chill. As she drifted towards sleep, she found herself watching Yorick's silhouette against the starry sky, wondering at the paths that had brought them both to this moment, sharing a campfire in the wilderness, united by loss and a common enemy. There was something comforting about his presence, this quiet, principled man who had risked himself for a stranger. In the chaotic weeks since her uncle's murder, Yorick Callahan was the first solid thing she'd found to hold on to. With that thought, she fell into a dreamless sleep beneath the vast canopy of stars. Clara woke to the scent of coffee and the soft sounds of Yorick moving around the camp. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. She sat up, pushing hair from her face. "You should have woken me for my watch," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. Yorick handed her a tin cup of coffee. "You needed the rest more than I needed sleep." Clara accepted the cup gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "Did you sleep at all? Enough?" He returned to packing their meager supplies. "We should reach Copper Creek by nightfall if we make good time." They ate a quick breakfast and were on the trail as the sun crested the horizon. The day promised to be even hotter than the previous one, the sky a hard, unrelenting blue. Clara was grateful for the hat Yorick had given her, its wide brim shielding her face from the worst of the sun. "Tell me about the Blackwater Gang," she said as they rode. "How many are there?" "6, last I counted. Ezra Blackwater's the leader, the one with the burned face you mentioned. His brother Silas is his right hand. Then there's Fletcher, Willis, Doyle, and a newer fellow they call the Kid. Don't know his real name. They seem to move around a lot. That's their pattern. Hit a town or a stagecoach, then disappear into the wilderness for a while. They know the territory well, especially the places law doesn't reach. How do you track them?" Yorick's arm tightened slightly around her waist as they navigated a steep incline. "I listen. Watch. These men leave a trail of misery wherever they go. Someone always sees something, knows something. And in Copper Creek, I've got a contact there. Man named Eugene who runs the livery. He keeps his eyes open, lets me know when certain types pass through." They rode in companionable silence for a while. The terrain grew more rugged as they continued, with rocky outcroppings and the occasional twisted juniper breaking the monotony of the desert landscape. Around midday, as they paused to rest midnight by a small spring, Clara noticed Yorick scanning the horizon with a frown. "What is it?" she asked. "Dust cloud." He pointed to a distant smudge against the blue sky. "Riders moving fast." Clara felt a stab of fear. The Blackwater Gang could be, or just travelers in a hurry. He helped her mount quickly. "Either way, best not to be seen." They moved away from the spring, Yorick guiding Midnight into a narrow canyon where the high walls would hide them from view. They dismounted in the shadows, Yorick keeping one hand on Midnight's nose to keep him quiet. The minutes stretched tensely as they waited. Clara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, feel the weight of the derringer in her pocket. Finally, the sound of hoofbeats reached them, growing louder as the riders approached. Through a gap in the rocks, Clara caught glimpses of 4 men riding hard along the trail they had just left. Her breath caught as she recognized one of them, a man with a distinctive red bandana she'd seen among those who had sold her in Redemption Springs. Yorick saw her reaction. "You know them," he whispered. Clara nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. "The one with the red bandana. He was one of the men who bought me from the Blackwater Gang." Yorick's expression hardened. "Looking for you then. Word travels fast out here." They remained hidden until long after the riders had passed, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. "Will they find your cabin?" Clara asked as they cautiously emerged from their hiding place. "Possibly, but they won't find us there." Yorick helped her back onto Midnight. "We need to reach Copper Creek before they realize they've overshot us." They rode hard for the rest of the day, stopping only when necessary to rest Midnight. The landscape gradually changed, scrubland giving way to more vegetation as they approached the foothills of a distant mountain range. By late afternoon, Clara could see smoke rising from what must be chimneys, and the rutted trail they followed became a more established road. "Copper Creek," Yorick said as the town came into view. It was larger than Clara had expected, with several streets of buildings spreading out from a central thoroughfare. The mountainside behind the town was scarred with mining operations. "We'll stable midnight at Eugene's livery, then find somewhere to stay for the night," Yorick said as they approached the outskirts. "Keep your hat low and let me do the talking." The livery was at the edge of town, a large, well-maintained stable with a sign reading Eugene's Livery and Smithy. A heavy-set man with an impressive mustache emerged as they rode up. "Well, look what the wind blew in," the man called cheerfully. "Been a while, Callahan." "Eugene." Yorick dismounted, then helped Clara down. "Need a stall for midnight and a fresh horse for the lady." Eugene's eyes flickered curiously to Clara, then back to Yorick. "Sure thing. Got a nice gentle mare, might suit the lady fine." He led Midnight into the stable, continuing to chat. "Heard you might be coming this way. Glad you made it before that storm rolls in." Clara glanced at the clear sky in confusion, but Yorick gave a slight nod. "Any other travelers passed through recently?" "Few drummers, the usual miners," Eugene said casually. "Oh, and some fellows asking after a missing wife. Seemed mighty concerned." Clara stiffened, but Yorick's hand on her arm kept her calm. "That right," Yorick said, his tone neutral. "Yep, told them haven't seen any strange women traveling alone." Eugene winked at Clara. "They headed west about an hour ago, said they'd be back tomorrow to check again." "Appreciate the information," Yorick said. "We'll need that mare ready by morning." "First light," Eugene promised. He lowered his voice. "Room at the back of Widow Chen's boarding house is empty. She doesn't ask questions." After arranging for Midnight's care and the purchase of the mare, Yorick led Clara through back streets toward the boarding house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the buildings. "Eugene seemed to know why we're here," Clara said quietly. "He's been helping me track the Blackwater Gang for months," Yorick explained. "Good man. Lost his son to them 2 years back." The boarding house was a neat 2-story building set back from the main street. A slender woman of Asian descent answered Yorick's knock, her face lighting with recognition. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her accent slight but noticeable. "It has been too long. Mrs. Chen." Yorick greeted her with more warmth than Clara had yet seen from him. "We need a room." Eugene suggested you might have space. Mrs. Chen's dark eyes assessed Clara briefly. "For you and your wife, of course. The back room is available." She gestured for them to follow her through the house to a small but clean room with a single bed, a washstand, and a chair. "No questions asked, no answers given," she said with a smile that suggested she knew exactly what wasn't being said. "Dinner will be ready in 1 hour." After she left, Clara looked at the single bed, then at Yorick, a flush rising to her cheeks. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said quickly. "Or in the chair." "I didn't mean to take your friend's last room," Clara said. "I could have stayed elsewhere." "No," Yorick's tone was firm. "Better to stay together, especially with those men from Redemption Springs in the area." He set down their saddlebags. "Mrs. Chen is trustworthy. Her husband was killed by claim jumpers years back. She understands the need for discretion." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue and the strangeness of her situation. 2 days ago, she had been a captive, certain her life was over. Now she was in a mining town with a bounty hunter, helping to track the men who had murdered her uncle. "Are you all right?" Yorick asked, noticing her expression. Clara managed a small smile. "Just tired, and trying to make sense of everything." Yorick nodded. "Rest a while. I'll wake you for dinner." As he turned to leave, Clara called after him. "Where are you going?" "To learn what I can about the Blackwater Gang." He paused at the door. "Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Mrs. Chen." After he left, Clara secured the door as instructed. She removed her boots and hat, then lay down on the bed, intending only to rest her eyes for a moment. Instead, exhaustion claimed her immediately, pulling her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to a gentle knock and Yorick's voice calling her name. The room was dark save for the glow of a lamp in the hallway visible under the door. "Coming," she called, quickly smoothing her hair and replacing her boots before opening the door. Yorick stood there, his expression unreadable. "Dinner's ready, and I have news." Clara followed him to a small dining room where Mrs. Chen had set a table for three. The aroma of unfamiliar but delicious-smelling food filled the air, making Clara realize how hungry she was. "Please sit, Mrs." Chen gestured to the table laden with dishes of rice, vegetables, and meat prepared in ways Clara had never seen. "Eat while it is hot." As they ate, Yorick shared what he had learned in town. The Blackwater Gang was here 3 days ago. They stayed one night, caused trouble at the saloon, then left heading north. "North?" Clara asked between bites of the surprisingly delicious food. "Is that good or bad?" "Could be either. There's a mining camp that way, easy pickings. But also an old hunting cabin Ezra Blackwater has used before." Yorick's eyes met hers across the table. "If they're there, we could catch them off guard. And the men from Redemption Springs, Eugene will send them on a wild goose chase west." Yorick took a sip of tea. "But we need to move quickly. They'll figure out they've been misled eventually." Mrs. Chen, who had been quietly eating, spoke up. "The storm comes tomorrow. From the north, you should wait." Yorick shook his head. "Can't afford to, May, but thank you for the warning." "After dinner, Mrs." Chen insisted on giving Clara a proper bath in a small room off the kitchen. The hot water was heavenly after days of creek washing, and the clean clothes Mrs. Chen provided simple but well-made trousers and a shirt that must have belonged to her late husband were a vast improvement over Yorick's oversized garments. When Clara returned to their room, her hair still damp but clean, she found Yorick cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, something indefinable crossing his features before he returned to his task. "Mrs. Chen is very kind," Clara said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "and an excellent cook." "She is," Yorick agreed. "One of the few true friends I have left." Clara watched his hands as they moved with practiced efficiency over the weapon. "The men who are looking for me, what will happen if they find us?" Yorick set the revolver aside, his eyes meeting hers. "They won't, and if they did, they'd regret it." The simple statement, delivered without bravado, reassured Clara more than any elaborate promises could have. Yorick Callahan was a man of his word, and he had promised to protect her. "Tomorrow we'll head north," he continued. "The Mayor Eugene is preparing for you as steady but fast when needed. If the Blackwater Gang is at that cabin, we'll observe from a distance, then I'll decide how to proceed. And if they're not there, then we keep tracking them." Yorick's gaze was steady. "I won't stop until they answer for what they've done, to your uncle, to others." Clara nodded, determination rising within her. "Neither will I." A ghost of a smile touched Yorick's lips. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be challenging, especially if Mrs. Chen is right about the storm." True to his word, Yorick took the chair, insisting Clara take the bed. As she drifted toward sleep, listening to the soft sounds of his breathing across the small room, Clara realized she felt safer with this near stranger than she had with anyone since her parents died. There was something about Yorick Callahan, his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of right and wrong that made her feel the world hadn't completely fallen apart after all, that there might still be good people, even in the wild and lawless West. With that comforting thought, she fell asleep, untroubled by dreams or fears for the first time in weeks. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds building on the northern horizon. Yorick frowned at the sky as they made their way to Eugene's livery shortly after sunrise. "Mrs. Chen was right about the storm," Clara observed, pulling her borrowed coat tighter against the chill wind. "It'll hit by afternoon," Yorick agreed. "We'll need to find shelter before then." Eugene had the horses ready midnight for Yorick and a sturdy bay mare for Clara. "This is Daisy," Eugene said, patting the mare's neck. "Not as fast as Midnight, but she's sure-footed and calm in a storm." Clara stroked Daisy's soft nose, feeling an immediate connection with the gentle animal. "She's perfect, thank you." As Eugene helped them prepare, he spoke quietly to Yorick. "Those men came back late last night, angry. They know they've been misled." Yorick nodded grimly. "We'll be long gone before they figure anything out. You take care, Eugene, always do." The liveryman glanced at Clara. "You found yourself a good man, miss. Stubborn as they come, but good." Before Clara could correct his assumption, Yorick had helped her mount and they were riding out of town, taking a little used trail that wound into the foothills to the north. Clara found Daisy responsive and easy to ride, just as Eugene had promised. The mare kept pace with Midnight without difficulty, and Clara reveled in the freedom of having her own mount after days of riding double. They traveled quickly but cautiously, Yorick frequently checking their back trail. The clouds continued to build and the wind grew stronger, carrying the scent of rain. "How far to this cabin?" Clara asked as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. "About 4 hours' ride," Yorick replied, scanning the horizon, "but we'll need to find shelter before the storm hits. There's a cave system about an hour ahead. We can wait it out there." As they continued, the landscape became increasingly rugged, with pine trees growing more numerous as they gained elevation. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Clara was grateful for the warm coat Mrs. Chen had insisted she take. True to Yorick's word, within an hour they reached a rocky outcropping with a dark opening visible at its base. The storm was closing in fast, the wind now strong enough to bend the tops of the pine trees. "We'll leave the horses in that stand of trees," Yorick decided, pointing to a dense grove that would provide some protection. "The cave entrance is small but opens up inside. It'll be dry at least." They secured the horses as best they could, using ropes to fashion makeshift shelters with their blankets. Clara stroked Daisy's neck reassuringly before following Yorick to the cave entrance. The opening was indeed narrow, requiring them to duck and turn sideways to enter. Inside, however, the space widened considerably, forming a chamber large enough to stand in comfortably. The air was cool but dry, and the stone walls would provide protection from the wind. "It's not the Copper Creek Hotel, but it'll do," Yorick said, setting down their supplies. He produced a small lantern from his saddlebag and lit it, casting a warm glow throughout the cave. Clara sat on a flat rock, watching as Yorick efficiently arranged their gear. "You've used this place before," she observed. He nodded. "A few times. It's a good waypoint." Outside, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. Lightning flashed, followed by a boom of thunder that seemed to shake the very mountain. "Good timing," Clara said, grateful to be out of the storm. She rubbed her hands together, realizing how cold they had become. Yorick noticed. "Let me get a small fire going. There's a natural chimney in the back that draws the smoke out." He gathered some of the dry wood he had apparently stored in the cave on previous visits, and soon had a small fire crackling in a ring of stones. Clara moved closer, extending her hands toward the welcome warmth. "Thank you," she said, as feeling returned to her fingers. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't come along." Yorick's expression darkened. "I know exactly what would have happened. I've seen it before." Clara studied his face in the flickering firelight. "Is that why you do this? Hunt men like the Blackwater Gang?" He poked at the fire with a stick, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Partly, and partly because someone has to. The law doesn't reach everywhere out here." "You mentioned they killed someone important to you," Clara said carefully. "Was that true?" Yorick was silent for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said. "My brother. He was a stagecoach driver on the Santa Fe route. 3 years ago, the Blackwater Gang hit his coach, killed everyone aboard, including Jacob." "I'm so sorry," Clara said softly. "He was the last family I had." Yorick's voice was flat. "After Sarah and Emma died, Jacob was the one who kept me going when I lost him too." He trailed off, then continued more firmly. "I swore I'd find the men responsible, make them pay. And that's when you left the Rangers," he nodded. "They wanted me to let it go. Said I was too personally involved. So I turned in my badge and went after the gang myself." 3 years is a long time to hunt someone," Clara observed. "They're good at disappearing, and they're not the only outlaws I've tracked." Yorick met her eyes across the fire. "But they're the ones that matter most." Clara understood then, the depth of his determination, the years of pursuing justice for his brother. It explained so much about him, his solitary nature, his unflinching resolve, the way he had risked himself to save her from a similar fate. The storm raged outside, rain lashing at the cave entrance and wind howling through the trees. Inside, however, it was surprisingly cozy, the small fire providing both warmth and light. Yorick pulled some jerky and dried fruit from his supplies. "Not as good as Mrs. Chen's cooking," he said with a hint of a smile, "but it'll keep us going." As they ate their simple meal, Clara found herself telling Yorick more about her life before her childhood in Virginia, her father's horse farm, her mother's love of music. He listened attentively, asking occasional questions that showed genuine interest. "You miss it," he observed. "Virginia." "I miss what it was," Clara corrected. "Before the war, before everything changed. But that place doesn't exist anymore except in my memories." Yorick nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The world has a way of moving on whether we're ready or not." "What will you do?" Clara asked. "After you find the Blackwater Gang," the question seemed to surprise him. "Haven't thought that far ahead. Been focused on finding them for so long, I'm not sure what comes after." "You could go back to the Rangers," Clara suggested, "or find a place to settle down." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Can't quite picture myself settling down anywhere." "No." Clara tried to imagine Yorick in a normal life, owning a ranch perhaps, or working as a town sheriff. It was difficult to reconcile with the man before her, who seemed as wild and untamed as the land itself. "What about you?" he asked, turning the question back on her. "Still planning to go to San Francisco," Clara hesitated. The plan had been her uncle's, not hers. San Francisco and her aunt's house had been a refuge of necessity, not choice. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been one for city living, and my aunt, we've never been close. She's my father's half-sister, much older than him. I've only met her twice." Thunder crashed outside, making them both jump. The storm was directly overhead now, the rain coming down in sheets. "Sounds like we'll be here a while," Yorick observed. "Might as well get comfortable." He arranged their bedrolls near the fire, making sure Clara's was on the driest patch of ground. As the afternoon wore on, they talked more about books they had read, places they had seen, small, inconsequential things that nonetheless revealed the person beneath. Clara found herself laughing at Yorick's dry observations about frontier life, discovering a sense of humor she hadn't expected from the serious bounty hunter. In turn, he seemed to enjoy her stories of Eastern society and its often ridiculous conventions. As evening approached, The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it grew more intense, with wind that screamed through the trees and rain that fell with punishing force. "We'll stay here tonight," Yorick decided. "No sense risking the horses in this weather, and the Blackwater cabin isn't going anywhere." He checked on the horses, returning soaked to the skin despite the brief exposure. Clara insisted he take the blanket she had wrapped around her shoulders. "You'll catch your death otherwise," she said firmly. Yorick accepted with a nod of thanks, removing his wet coat and hanging it on a rock near the fire to dry. In the close confines of the cave, Clara found herself acutely aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders beneath his damp shirt, the way firelight caught in his dark hair. They ate another simple meal as darkness fell, the storm their constant companion. Afterward, Yorick added wood to the fire, building it up to last through the night. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll take first watch." Clara settled onto her bedroll, pulling her blanket around her. "Wake me for my turn," she insisted. "You need rest too." Yorick nodded, though Clara suspected he might let her sleep through the night again. His protective instincts seemed deeply ingrained. As she drifted toward sleep, lulled by the sound of rain and the crackling fire, Clara realized how much had changed in just a few days. She had gone from captive to fugitive to partner in pursuit of justice. And somewhere along the way, Yorick Callahan had become more than her rescuer. He had become someone she trusted, someone she admired, someone she was beginning to care for more than she should. That thought followed her into dreams, where blue eyes watched over her and strong hands kept her safe from storms both literal and figurative. Clara woke to silence. After the constant noise of the storm, the quiet was startling. She sat up, blinking in the dim light of the dying fire. Yorick was asleep on his bedroll across from her, his face relaxed in slumber, looking younger and less careworn. Moving quietly, Clara added wood to the fire, careful not to wake him. She went to the cave entrance and found dawn breaking over a washed, clean world. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind crystal-clear air and a landscape transformed by rain. Water dripped from pine needles, sparkling in the early light. She heard Yorick stir behind her. "Been up long?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Just a few minutes." Clara turned to face him. "It's beautiful out there." He joined her at the entrance, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Storms moved on. We should be able to reach the cabin by midday." They broke their fast with the last of their provisions, then checked on the horses. Daisy and Midnight had weathered the storm well, though they were clearly eager to move after being confined. The trail was muddy and treacherous in places, forcing them to ride slowly. Water rushed in streams that had been dry the day before, and twice they had to find alternate routes where the path had washed out completely. Despite the challenges, Clara found herself enjoying the ride. The air was clean and cool, the forest alive with birdsong, and Daisy responded to her commands as if they had been partners for years instead of a single day. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Yorick became increasingly vigilant, frequently stopping to listen or study the terrain ahead. By late morning, he signaled for them to dismount and continue on foot, leading the horses. "We're getting close," he explained in a low voice. "Best to approach carefully from here." They secured the horses in a sheltered hollow. Then Yorick led Clara along a narrow deer trail that wound through dense undergrowth. After about half a mile, he dropped to a crouch, motioning for her to do the same. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, stood a small log cabin in a natural clearing. Smoke rose from its chimney and 2 horses were tethered outside. "Is it them?" Clara whispered. Yorick nodded grimly. "Those are Blackwater Gang horses. I recognize the markings." He studied the cabin through narrowed eyes. Only two, though. The gang usually travels together. What do? We wait. Watch. See who's inside and if the others are nearby. He moved back into the cover of the trees, Clara following. There's a better vantage point this way. He led her to a rocky outcropping that overlooked the cabin from the opposite side. From this position, they could see both the front and back of the structure without being easily spotted. We'll watch in shifts, Yorick decided. I'll take first watch. You rest. Clara started to protest, but realized she was indeed tired from the difficult morning's ride. She settled against a tree trunk, her eyes still on the cabin below. "What will you do when we know who's down there?" she asked quietly. Yorick's expression hardened. "Depends who it is. If it's Ezra or Sila's Blackwater, I'll need to be careful. They're dangerous men. And if it's just some of the others, still dangerous, but perhaps an opportunity." He checked his revolver. "If I can take one or two alive, they might lead us to the rest." Clara nodded, understanding his strategy. "Wake me in 2 hours, then. I mean at this time." A hint of a smile touched Yorick's lips. "Yes, madam." True to his word, Yorick woke Clara after 2 hours. Nothing had changed at the cabin. No one had emerged, though occasionally they saw movement through the single window. "Keep low and stay alert," Yorick instructed as they traded places. "If anyone approaches, signal me quietly." Clara settled into position, focusing on the cabin with an intensity that surprised her. 2 months ago, she had been a respectable young woman from Virginia whose greatest concern had been finding a suitable position as a governess or companion. Now she was crouched on a mountainside with a bounty hunter, watching outlaws who had murdered her uncle. Life could change in an instant, she reflected. One stagecoach robbery had altered her entire existence, sending her down a path she never could have imagined. An hour into her watch, the cabin door opened. Clara tensed, signaling to Yorick, who had been dozing nearby. A man emerged, stretching in the afternoon sunlight. Even from this distance, Clara recognized him, one of the younger members of the gang who had guarded her during her captivity. "Willis," Yorick had called him. A moment later, a second man appeared in the doorway. Clara's blood ran cold as she recognized the distinctive scarred face of Ezra Blackwater himself. "The leader's there," she whispered to Yorick, who had moved silently to her side. Yorick's jaw tightened. "Just the two of them, it seems. This might be our best chance." The men below were talking, though they were too far away to hear what was being said. Ezra appeared to be giving instructions, pointing toward the horses and then to the west. "Looks like Willis is getting ready to leave," Yorick observed. "Probably to meet up with the others somewhere." Sure enough, Willis began saddling one of the horses while Ezra returned inside. Within minutes, Willis mounted and rode away, heading west along a trail that skirted the clearing. "Now we have just Blackwater to deal with," Yorick said, his voice low and intent. "I'm going down there." "Alone?" Clara's hand shot out to grasp his arm. "That's too dangerous. It's what I came for." Yorick's eyes met hers, determination etched in every line of his face. "Stay here. If something goes wrong, take Daisy and ride back to Copper Creek. Eugene will help you get to San Francisco." "No." Clara's grip on his arm tightened. "I'm coming with you." Yorick started to argue, then something in her expression stopped him. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Stay behind me. Do exactly as I say. And if I tell you to run, you run." "No arguments," Clara agreed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. This was the man who had orchestrated her uncle's murder, who had treated her like property to be sold. Whatever happened, she needed to look him in the eyes, to be part of bringing him to justice. They moved carefully down the slope, using trees and rocks for cover. Yorick's movements were silent and assured, and Clara did her best to mimic his caution. When they reached the edge of the clearing, He motioned for her to stay put while he circled around to approach the cabin from the rear. Clara watched as Yorick disappeared into the trees, then reappeared at the back of the cabin. He moved with the grace of a predator, his revolver now drawn and ready. When he reached the back door, he paused, listening, then tried the handle. It opened silently. In one fluid motion, Yorick slipped inside. Clara held her breath, straining to hear what was happening. For several agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then a crash, followed by a shout and the sounds of a struggle. Unable to remain hidden any longer, Clara ran toward the cabin. As she reached the front door, a gunshot rang out from inside. Her heart in her throat, she flung open the door to find Yorick standing over Ezra Blackwater, who lay on the floor clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "You're too late, Callahan," Blackwater snarled through gritted teeth. "The others are already heading for the border with the payroll money." "What payroll?" Yorick demanded, his gun still trained on the wounded outlaw. Blackwater laughed, a harsh sound that ended in a grimace of pain. "Army payroll, $20,000, should be halfway to Mexico by now." Clara moved into the cabin, her eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed her life. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing than in her memories, just a vicious man brought low by his own evil. Blackwater's eyes widened when he saw her. Well, if it ain't the Virginia filly. Thought you'd been sold off by now." "You murdered my uncle," Clara said, her voice steady despite the hatred coursing through her. "Thomas Summers. You shot him in cold blood." "Mr. High and Mighty with his fancy watch and Eastern accent," Blackwater sneered. "Should have handed over his valuables without a fuss." Clara's hand moved to the derringer in her pocket, but Yorick's voice stopped her. "He's not worth it, Clara," he said quietly. "He'll hang for what he's done, to your uncle, to my brother, to countless others." Blackwater's eyes narrowed. "Brother? What brother?" Jacob Callahan, stagecoach driver, 3 years ago outside Santa Fe. Recognition dawned on Blackwater's face, followed by a cruel smile. "The one who tried to play hero, put up quite a fight, that one. Took 3 bullets before he went down." Yorick's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his knuckles whiten on the grip of his revolver. For a moment, she thought he might shoot Blackwater where he lay. Instead, he holstered his gun and pulled rope from his belt. "On your feet," he ordered. "You're going to tell me exactly where your gang is heading, and then you're going to jail to wait for the hangman." As Yorick secured Blackwater's hands behind his back, Clara looked around the cabin. It was sparsely furnished: a table, chairs, a stone fireplace, and a narrow bed in one corner. Maps and papers were scattered across the table, and saddlebags lay open on the floor where they had been dropped during the struggle. Yorick forced Blackwater into a chair, then quickly bound his wound with a strip of cloth torn from a shirt. "Won't do to have you bleeding out before you face justice," he said grimly. Blackwater glared at him. "You think I'm afraid of hanging? I've cheated death more times than you've drawn breath, Ranger." "Ex-Ranger," Yorick corrected. He turned to Clara. "Check those saddlebags. See if there's anything that might tell us where the others are headed." Clara moved to the bags, carefully sorting through their contents. She found ammunition, some dried meat, a bottle of whiskey, and a folded piece of paper that looked like a map. "Here," she said, handing it to Yorick. "This might help." Yorick unfolded the map, studying it intently. "Sierra Pass," he murmured. "That's where they're meeting up." He looked at Blackwater. "Your brother leading them." Blackwater said nothing, but his expression confirmed Yorick's guess. "We need to get back to Copper Creek," Yorick decided. "Get word to the army about the payroll robbery and this one behind bars where he belongs." "You'll never catch them in time," Blackwater taunted. "Silas knows every trail and hideout from here to Mexico." "Maybe." Yorick hauled Blackwater to his feet. "But I know them too." They left the cabin with Blackwater securely bound and mounted on his own horse, which Yorick led while Clara rode Daisy. The journey back to Copper Creek was slow and tense, with Blackwater occasionally making threats or trying to provoke Yorick. Clara watched Yorick's profile as they rode, marveling at his self-control. This was the moment he had been working toward for 3 years, capturing one of the men responsible for his brother's death. Yet he remained focused on justice, rather than revenge. It was nearly nightfall when they reached Copper Creek. Their arrival with a bound Ezra Blackwater caused quite a stir, with townsfolk emerging from businesses and homes to watch as Yorick marched his prisoner toward the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Harker, looked up in surprise as they entered. "Callahan." "What in tarnation?" His eyes widened as he recognized the prisoner. "Is that who I think it is?" "Ezra Blackwater," Yorick confirmed. "Wanted for murder, robbery, and more other crimes than you have cells for." Sheriff Harker whistled low. "Never thought I'd see the day. Got any proof it's him?" "I can identify him." Clara stepped forward. "He and his gang murdered my uncle, Thomas Summers, and held me captive for weeks." The sheriff looked at her with newfound respect. "That'll do for now. Federal marshals due through here in 3 days. He can take Blackwater to Denver for trial." As they secured Blackwater in a cell, Yorick explained about the Army payroll robbery and the rest of the gang heading for Sierra Pass. "I can send a telegram to Fort Collins," Harker offered. "They might be able to intercept the gang before they reach the border." "Do it," Yorick agreed. "And I'll head for Sierra Pass at first light. If the Army's slow to respond, I might be able to catch them myself." "Not alone, you won't," Clara said firmly. "I'm coming with you." Yorick started to object, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. "It's too dangerous, Clara." "Everything since my uncle died has been dangerous," she countered. "I want to see this through. All of it." After ensuring Blackwater was securely locked away, they returned to Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The news of their capture of the notorious outlaw had preceded them, and Mrs. Chen greeted them with a mixture of relief and concern. "You both need rest," she insisted, ushering them inside. "And food. Then rest." Over a hearty meal, Clara and Yorick discussed their plans for the next day. Sierra Pass was a full day's hard ride from Copper Creek through difficult terrain. "If they're already there, we'll be outnumbered," Yorick warned. 4 against 2 aren't good odds." 3 against 2, Clara corrected. Blackwater said Willis was meeting up with the others, and there's Sela's. "Who's the third?" "The kid, most likely." "Fletcher and Doyle usually stick with Ezra." Yorick frowned. "Still not odds I like, especially with you along." "I can shoot," Clara insisted. "My father taught me, and I won't be a liability." Yorick studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this smart. No unnecessary risks." After dinner, they retired to their room. The events of the day had left them both exhausted, yet Clara found sleep elusive. The confrontation with Blackwater had stirred up memories of her uncle's death, along with questions about what would come next. "Yorick." She called softly, unsure if he was still awake in his chair by the window. His voice came back immediately, suggesting he had been as restless as she. "What happens after? If we capture the rest of the gang, I mean." There was a long pause. "Justice happens. They face trial for their crimes." "No, I meant for us. What happens to us?" In the dim light from the window, she could see him shift in his chair. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "I've been focused on finding the Blackwaters for so long, everything else seemed distant." Clara sat up in bed, drawing her knees to her chest. "I've been thinking about it, about what comes next." And his voice was soft, curious. "I don't think I want to go to San Francisco anymore," she said slowly. "That was my uncle's plan for me, not mine, and after everything that's happened, I'm not the same person I was when we left Virginia." "What do you want, Clara?" The question was simple, direct, like the man who asked it. Clara took a deep breath. "I want to start over somewhere, build something of my own, maybe a small ranch or farm." She hesitated, then added more softly, "And I don't want to do it alone." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Clara held her breath, wondering if she had said too much, revealed feelings that had grown too quickly in the intensity of their shared experiences. Finally, Yorick moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed. In the moonlight, his expression was unreadable. "Clara," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm not the kind of man who makes promises easily. My life hasn't left much room for connections, for putting down roots." Clara's heart sank, but she nodded, understanding. "Of course. I didn't mean to presume. Let me finish," he interrupted gently. His hand found hers in the darkness. "What I'm trying to say is that until I met you, I couldn't imagine a future beyond hunting the Blackwater Gang. You've changed that, made me see possibilities I thought were gone forever." Hope blossomed in Clara's chest. "What kind of possibilities?" "A home, a life that's about more than just revenge or justice." His fingers tightened around hers. "A life with someone who understands what it means to lose everything and still find the strength to rebuild." Clara's free hand moved to his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "Someone like me, exactly like you." Yorick leaned into her touch. "But first, we need to finish what we started. Make sure the rest of the gang faces justice. And then, he said softly, we figure out what comes next, together." In the quiet of the room, with moonlight spilling through the window and the sounds of the town fading as night deepened, Clara Summers and Yorick Callahan sealed their tentative promise with a kiss gentle at first, then deepening with the emotions they had both kept in check during their dangerous journey. When they finally parted, Clara felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her. The pain of her uncle's death and her own ordeal would never completely fade, but alongside it now grew something new and hopeful, the possibility of a future with this extraordinary man who had risked everything to save her. "Together," she echoed, the word a promise of its own. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the window as Clara and Yorick prepared for the journey ahead. They moved around each other with a new awareness, their relationship transformed by the previous night's revelations. Mrs. Chen provided them with a hearty breakfast and provisions for the journey. "You be careful," she admonished, pressing extra supplies into Clara's hands. "Both of you." "We will, Mrs. Chen," Clara promised, "and thank you for everything." At the livery, Eugene had Midnight and Daisy ready, along with extra ammunition Yorick had requested. "Sheriff sent that telegram to Fort Collins," he informed them. "Got a reply this morning. Army's dispatching a patrol, but they won't reach Sierra Pass before tomorrow at the earliest. Then it's up to us to find the gang and keep them there until the army arrives," Yorick said grimly. He checked his weapons one last time before mounting Midnight. They rode out of Copper Creek as the town was just beginning to stir, taking the north trail that would eventually lead to Sierra Pass. The day was clear and cool, ideal for hard riding, and they made good progress through the morning. Clara found herself studying Yorick as they rode, noticing small details she had missed before, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, revealing strands of auburn, the tiny scar near his right eyebrow, the grace with which he handled Midnight, horse and rider moving as one. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses by a small stream. As Clara refilled their canteens, Yorick spread out the map they had taken from Blackwater's cabin. "Sierra Pass is here," he said, pointing to a narrow gap between mountains. "There's an old mining camp just on the other side where outlaws sometimes hole up. My guess is that's where the gang will wait for Ezra before heading for the border. How will we approach? Clara asked, studying the map. There's a back way in through this canyon. Yorick traced a route with his finger. It's difficult riding, but it'll let us get close without being seen. From there, we can observe the camp and decide how to proceed. Clara nodded, appreciating that he included her in the planning rather than simply giving orders. And if we find them? We watch. Wait for the right moment. Yorick's expression was determined. These men are dangerous, Clara. I won't risk a frontal assault. They continued their journey, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as they climbed higher into the mountains. By late afternoon, they had reached the canyon Yorick had identified on the map. We'll leave the horses here, he decided, indicating a sheltered area with grass and water. The rest of the way is better done on foot. After securing Midnight and Daisy, they proceeded cautiously through the canyon, Yorick leading the way with his rifle ready. The narrow passage wound between towering rock walls, occasionally opening into small clearings before narrowing again. As the sun began to set, they reached the end of the canyon. Ahead, the land dropped away into a small valley. Nestled among trees at the far end were the remains of a mining camp, a collection of weathered buildings surrounding what had once been the mine entrance. There, Yorick whispered, pointing to movement near one of the buildings. 3 horses tied outside that larger structure must be the assay office. Clara squinted in the fading light. I see someone standing watch near that barrel. Yorick nodded. Good eye. That's the kid, if I'm not mistaken. Young but deadly. They settled into position behind a fallen log, observing the camp as darkness fell. Lights appeared in the windows of the assay office, and occasionally they could hear faint voices carried on the evening breeze. They're waiting for Ezra, Yorick murmured, probably getting impatient by now. What's our plan? Clara asked, trying to ignore the growing chill as night deepened around them. We wait until they are asleep. Then I'll move in closer, see if I can overhear anything useful. Yorick glanced at her. You stay here, keep watch. Clara started to object, then thought better of it. This was what Yorick did, what he was trained for. Her presence was already a complication he was accommodating. All right, she agreed, but be careful. Hours passed in tense silence. One by one, the lights in the camp went out, until only a single lantern burned in what appeared to be the main room of the assay office. The guard changed once, with a taller man, Silas Blackwater. Yorick whispered, taking over from the kid. Just after midnight, Yorick touched Clara's arm. I'm going in closer. If anything happens, use this. He handed her a small signal whistle. 1 blast if you need to warn me, 2 if there's immediate danger. Clara nodded, tucking the whistle into her pocket next to her derringer. How long should I wait before worrying? A ghost of a smile touched Yorick's lips. An hour. Any longer than that, and something's gone wrong. He melted into the darkness with a stealth that impressed her, his movements completely silent as he made his way down the slope toward the camp. Clara watched until she could no longer distinguish his form from the shadows, then settled in to keep her vigil. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Clara strained her eyes and ears, trying to track Yorick's progress, but the night revealed nothing. In the camp below, Silas Blackwater paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to stare out into the darkness as if sensing something amiss. Clara's heart nearly stopped when she saw Silas suddenly raise his rifle, pointing it toward the very area where Yorick had disappeared. She reached for the whistle, ready to sound a warning, when a distant noise distracted the outlaw, the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders appeared at the far end of the camp, moving quickly toward the buildings. Silas lowered his rifle and called out a greeting. As the newcomers dismounted, Clara could see they were all men, dressed in trail gear and heavily armed. This wasn't part of the plan. There should have been only 3 gang members: Silas, Willis, and the kid. Now there were 6 men in the camp, and Yorick was somewhere in the midst of them, unaware of the new arrivals. Clara fumbled for the whistle, her fingers clumsy with cold and fear. She had to warn him, but before she could raise it to her lips, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. "Don't scream," a voice hissed in her ear. "It's me." Relief flooded through her as Yorick released his hold. "You scared me half to death," she whispered fiercely. "Sorry, had to get back to you quickly when I saw those riders." Yorick settled beside her behind the log, his expression grim in the faint moonlight. "That's not the Blackwater Gang. Those are the men from Redemption Springs." Clara's blood ran cold. "The ones who bought me from the gang," Yorick nodded. "They must have followed our trail, or perhaps they were already working with the Blackwaters. Either way, it complicates things." Below, the new arrivals were talking animatedly with Silas, though they were too far away to make out words. After a moment, all the men went inside the assay office, leaving no guard posted. "This might actually work in our favor," Yorick mused. "If they're all inside, we could get closer, maybe even hear what they're planning." "It could be a trap," Clara warned. "Could be. But it's a risk we need to take." Yorick checked his revolver. "Stay here. I mean it this time. If I'm not back in half an hour, make your way back to the horses and ride for Copper Creek." Before Clara could argue, he was gone again, moving silently down the slope toward the now unguarded camp. She watched, heart in her throat, as he approached the assay office, keeping to the shadows and pausing frequently to listen. When he reached the building, he crouched beneath a window where lamplight spilled out into the night. Clara could just make out his silhouette as he tilted his head, listening to the voices inside. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the door of the assay office burst open and men poured out, guns drawn. Yorick sprang away from the window, but he was surrounded within seconds, the outlaws forming a circle around him with weapons aimed at his heart. Clara stifled a cry, her hand flying to her mouth. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see Yorick slowly raising his hands in surrender as the men closed in. One of them, Silas Blackwater, she guessed from his height and bearing, stepped forward and struck Yorick across the face with the butt of his rifle. Yorick staggered but remained standing. Another blow followed, and this time he fell to his knees. Clara couldn't watch any longer. Her hand moved to the derringer in her pocket, but what could she do against 6 armed men? Even if she managed to hit one, the others would kill her instantly, and Yorick along with her. No, she needed a different approach. Something that would create a diversion, give Yorick a chance to fight back or escape. Her eyes fell on the horses tethered near the buildings. If she could frighten them, cause them to bolt. Decision made, Clara began moving laterally along the ridge, keeping low and using the brush for cover. Her goal was to circle around to the far side of the camp, where she could approach the horses without being seen from the assay office. The journey seemed to take forever, each step a potential betrayal if a twig snapped or a stone rolled beneath her feet. By the time she reached a position above the horses, Yorick had been dragged inside the assay office, his fate unknown. Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. She had one chance to create enough chaos to help Yorick, and she couldn't afford to hesitate or fail. From her pocket, she took a small box of matches Yorick had given her for emergencies. Then she gathered dry grass and twigs into a loose bundle. It wasn't much of a fire starter, but it would have to do. Striking a match, she lit the bundle, waiting until it caught properly before hurling it down toward the dry brush near the tethered horses. Then she struck another match and another, sending small burning missiles into different areas around the camp. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, As if by magic, small flames began to dance in the darkness, growing quickly as they found fuel in the parched vegetation. The horses noticed first, stamping nervously and pulling at their tethers as smoke reached their sensitive nostrils. Clara's final burning missile landed directly beneath the assay office's porch, where a pile of old mining equipment and wooden crates provided perfect fuel. Within seconds, flames were licking at the underside of the porch. The commotion had the desired effect. Men burst from the assay office, shouting in alarm as they saw the multiple fires beginning to spread around their camp. In the confusion, Clara spotted Yorick being dragged outside by two men, his hands bound behind him but very much alive. As the outlaws scrambled to control the fires and secure the panicking horses, Clara made her decision. Drawing the derringer from her pocket, she took careful aim at a barrel she hoped contained something flammable, positioned near where most of the men were gathered. She fired. The explosion that followed was more than she had hoped for. The barrel must have contained blasting powder or kerosene, because it erupted in a ball of flame that sent men diving for cover and horses breaking free of their tethers to gallop away into the night. In the chaos, Clara saw Yorick take advantage of his captor's distraction. Though his hands were bound, he drove his shoulder into one man's midsection, sending him sprawling, then kicked the legs out from under the other. Clara fired her second and final shot at a man raising his gun toward Yorick Callahan's Blackwater. She couldn't tell if she hit him, but the shot was close enough to make him duck for cover. Now weaponless, Clara could only watch and hope as Yorick rolled away from his fallen captors and disappeared into the smoke and shadows. The camp was in complete disarray, men shouting contradictory orders as they tried to control the spreading fires and figure out what was happening. Clara began making her way back toward their original position, hoping Yorick would think to meet her there. She had almost reached it when a hand closed around her ankle, yanking her to the ground. "Well, well," snarled a voice she recognized with horror. "If it ain't the pretty little thing that got away." One of the men from Redemption Springs loomed over her, his face twisted with malice in the flickering light from the distant fires. Clara kicked out desperately, her boot connecting with his knee. He cursed, but didn't release his grip. "You cost us a lot of money, girl," he growled, dragging her closer. "And now you're gonna pay." Clara fought with every ounce of strength she possessed, clawing and kicking as the man tried to subdue her. She managed to break free for a moment, scrambling to her feet, but he lunged after her, catching her dress. The sound of a revolver being cocked froze them both. "Let her go," Yorick's voice came from the darkness, deadly calm, "or the last thing you'll ever see is the inside of your skull." The man released Clara immediately, raising his hands. "Now hold on, mister. We were just having a disagreement is all. On your knees," Yorick ordered, emerging from the shadows. His face was bruised and there was blood at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were clear and focused, his gun hand steady despite the rope burns on his wrists. The man complied, sinking to his knees in the dirt. "You're making a mistake. I got friends down there who are too busy saving their own skins to worry about you." Yorick gestured for Clara to come to him, his eyes never leaving the kneeling man. "You all right?" he asked softly as she reached his side. "Yes," she managed, though her heart was still racing from the encounter. "You been better." He handed her a revolver he must have taken from one of his captors. "Watch him while I tie him up." Using strips torn from the man's own bandana, Yorick bound his hands and feet, then gagged him with what remained. "That should hold him until the army patrol arrives," he said, checking the knots. "We need to move. The others will start searching once they get the fires under control." They made their way quickly back through the canyon, the glow of the burning camp visible behind them for some time. Yorick moved with determination despite his obvious injuries, stopping only when they reached the horses. "That was quick thinking with the fires," he said as they mounted up. "Risky, but effective." "I couldn't think of anything else to do," Clara admitted. "When I saw them take you." Yorick's expression softened. "You saved my life. They were planning to hang me at dawn, make an example of me for interfering with their business." "Did you learn anything before they caught you?" He nodded grimly. "The army payroll is with them, and they're planning to cross into Mexico tomorrow, or were, before you set their camp on fire." They rode hard through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the outlaws. Dawn found them several miles from Sierra Pass, in a sheltered valley where a small stream provided water for the horses. "We should rest here briefly," Yorick decided, dismounting stiffly. His face was pale with exhaustion and pain. The army patrol should be reaching Sierra Pass soon. With luck, they'll capture anyone who didn't flee during the chaos. Clara helped him to a fallen log, then fetched water from the stream. Using a clean handkerchief, she gently cleaned the blood from his face. "Your ribs?" she asked, noticing how he winced when he moved. "Bruised, maybe cracked. Nothing that won't heal." He caught her hand as she tended to a cut above his eye. "Clara, what you did back there was incredibly brave. And incredibly foolish. I wasn't going to let them kill you," she said simply. The look in his eyes made her breath catch. "No, you certainly weren't." His hand moved to cup her cheek. "I've never met anyone like you, Clara Summers. Nor I you, Yorick Callahan." She leaned into his touch. "What happens now?" "Now we ride back to Copper Creek, report what we found to Sheriff Harker, and wait to hear if the army caught the rest of the gang." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "And then, I believe we had plans to discuss a future, together." Clara smiled, hope rising within her despite their exhaustion and the dangers still potentially ahead. "Yes, we did." Their journey back to Copper Creek was slower than their outward ride, both due to their fatigue and Yorick's injuries. They arrived late in the afternoon to find the town buzzing with excitement. The Army patrol captured 4 men at Sierra Pass this morning, Sheriff Harker informed them when they reported to his office. "Including Silas Blackwater and that fellow they call the Kid. Found the payroll money too, most of it anyway." "And the men from Redemption Springs?" Yorick asked. "2 dead in the fire, 1 captured, 1 missing." Harker shook his head in admiration. "That was some plan you 2 pulled off." Lieutenant Barnes of the patrol said the whole camp was in chaos when they arrived. "It was Miss Summers' plan," Yorick said, pride evident in his voice. "I was just along for the ride." After giving their formal statements, they returned to Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where they were greeted with relief and a flurry of concern over Yorick's injuries. "You need doctor," Mrs. Chen insisted, already preparing hot water and bandages. "I need rest more than a doctor," Yorick argued, though he submitted to her ministrations with better grace than Clara expected. After a hot meal and with Yorick's wounds properly cleaned and bandaged, they retreated to their room. The events of the past 2 days caught up with them both, exhaustion making even conversation an effort. "Sleep," Yorick said, gesturing to the bed. "We can talk tomorrow." "You're not sleeping in that chair with cracked ribs," Clara said firmly. "The bed is large enough for both of us." Yorick raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. They settled onto the bed with a proper space between them, both too tired for anything but sleep, yet comforted by each other's presence. As Clara drifted towards slumber, she felt Yorick's hand find hers in the darkness. "Thank you," he murmured, "for saving my life, for helping me find justice for Jacob." She squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you for saving mine." In the days that followed, news arrived that the last fugitive from Redemption Springs had been captured trying to cross into New Mexico territory. Ezra Blackwater and the remaining members of his gang were transferred to Denver for trial, escorted by a full complement of Army soldiers. "They'll hang," Sheriff Harker said bluntly when he delivered the news. "Too many witnesses, too many crimes. Justice will be served." Yorick received the news with quiet satisfaction rather than triumph. "It won't bring Jacob back," he told Clara later as they sat on the porch of Mrs. Chen's boarding house, "or your uncle, but knowing they can't hurt anyone else, it helps." As Yorick's injuries healed, they began discussing their future in earnest. Clara had no desire to continue to San Francisco, and Yorick admitted he had grown weary of the solitary life of a bounty hunter. "I've been thinking," he said one evening as they walked along Copper Creek's Main Street. "There's land for sale about 20 miles south of here. Good water, decent grazing, enough space to raise horses." Clara's heart quickened. "Horses? You said your father raised them in Virginia. Thought you might want to try your hand at it here." Yorick looked uncharacteristically uncertain. "If that appeals to you." "It appeals to me very much," Clara said softly. "But Yorick, are you sure? About settling down, I mean." He stopped walking, turning to face her. In the weeks since their first meeting, something had changed in his eyes. The haunted look had faded, replaced by a cautious hope. "I've spent 3 years chasing ghosts and outlaws," he said, "living from one day to the next with no thought beyond finding the Blackwater Gang. Now that's done, and I find myself wanting something I haven't wanted since I lost Sarah and Emma." He took her hands in his. "A home, a future, a family." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. "With me, only with you." Yorick's voice was rough with emotion. "I know it's fast. We've only known each other a short time, but what we've been through together, it shows a person's true character. And yours, Clara Summers, is the finest I've ever known." Clara reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "When my uncle died and I was taken by the gang, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I would find someone like you in the midst of such darkness." "Is that a yes?" Yorick asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yes," Clara said firmly. "Yes to the land, yes to the horses, and yes to building a future together." 2 months later, Clara Callahan stood on the porch of their newly constructed ranch house, watching as her husband worked with a spirited colt in the corral. The autumn sun caught in Yorick's hair as he moved with the animal, his patience and gentle firmness gradually winning the young horse's trust. The Callahan Horse Ranch was taking shape nicely. The house was small but solid, built by Yorick with help from Eugene and other friends from Copper Creek. The barn housed 6 horses already, including Midnight and Daisy, with plans for more as their breeding program expanded. Clara smiled as she remembered Mrs. Chen's reaction to their hasty wedding, performed by the circuit preacher just days after their decision to buy the land. "About time," the older woman had said with a knowing smile. "Was wondering how long you two would pretend to be just friends." Life on the frontier was challenging, but Clara found she thrived on it. The skills she had learned during their pursuit of the Blackwater Gang, riding hard, living rough, facing danger with courage, served her well as a rancher's wife. And the nightmares that had plagued her after her captivity gradually faded, replaced by dreams of the future they were building together. Yorick completed his session with the colt and released him back into the corral, then walked toward the house, his face lighting with a smile when he saw Clara waiting. "That one's going to make a fine saddle horse," he said, climbing the porch steps to join her. "Smart and spirited, but not mean." "Like his trainer," Clara teased, leaning into him as his arm went around her waist. Yorick chuckled, a sound that had become more frequent in recent months. "Got a letter from Sheriff Harker today," he said, his tone more serious. "The Blackwaters were hanged in Denver last week." "It's truly over now," Clara nodded, understanding the complex emotions this news would bring him. "How do you feel?" Yorick was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. "At peace, I think. Jacob can rest now, and so can I." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in gold and amber. Their land stretched before them, not as lush as Virginia perhaps, but beautiful in its own rugged way, full of possibility and promise. "I have news too," Clara said after a while, turning in his arms to face him. "News that might change our plans somewhat." Yorick raised an eyebrow, waiting. "We're going to need a bigger house," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently over her stomach. "By spring, there will be 3 of us." Yorick's expression transformed, disbelief giving way to joy as he understood her meaning. "A baby, you're sure?" Clara nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "Mrs. Chen confirmed it yesterday. She says I'm healthy and everything looks promising." Yorick pulled her close, his embrace gentle yet fierce. "I never thought I'd have this again," he whispered against her hair. "A family, a child." "Neither did I," Clara admitted. "After everything that happened, it seemed like too much to hope for." Yorick drew back to look at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You gave me back hope, Clara. From that first day in Redemption Springs when you trusted a stranger enough to play along with my wild story." "You weren't a stranger," Clara said softly. "Somehow, I think I knew even then that you were my future." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their land, Yorick Callahan kissed his wife with all the tenderness and passion that had grown between them since that fateful day when he had declared to a crowd of rough men that she belonged with him. It had been a lie then, a desperate ploy to save her from a terrible fate. But sometimes, Clara reflected as she returned his kiss, the most unexpected truths grew from necessary falsehoods. And sometimes the wildest, most dangerous paths led exactly where you were meant to be all along. In the years that followed, the Callahan Horse Ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for its fine stock and fair dealings. Yorick occasionally took on work as a scout for the army or as a special deputy when particularly dangerous criminals needed apprehending, but his bounty hunting days were behind him. Their son, Thomas Jacob Callahan, named for the uncle and brother they had lost, was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Emma Sarah. The children grew strong and happy in the shadow of the mountains, learning to ride almost before they could walk, their father's courage and their mother's determination evident in both. And if travelers passing through sometimes remarked on the unusual story of how the Callahans had met of an auction stopped by a man's declaration, and a woman's courage neither Yorick nor Clara minded. Their beginning may have been unconventional, forged in danger and desperation, but the love and life they built together was stronger for having weathered such storms. "She belongs with me," Yorick had said that day in Redemption Springs. Years later, holding Clara in their home with their children sleeping peacefully nearby, he knew no truer words had ever been spoken.